Well, we know Mr. Sowore had been on hunger strike since his arrest on Saturday, and that his associates have now been allowed to bring food to him in detention. African Affairs Analyst Kayode Ogundamisi is joining me to share his perspective on the revolution and now protest and the arrest of Mr. Sowore. Good to have you, Kayode Ogundamisi. First of all, talk to us about your thoughts on the revolution that never was.
Thanks for having me, Ngozi. You see, I think civil society in Nigeria they need to start speaking truth to themselves, just the way they want to subject truth to the so-called oppressors, the government. Section 41 of the Criminal Code of our country is quite clear. Any attempt to forcefully remove elected officials is criminal, it is not acceptable. The leadership of the Revolution Now movement should have been very clear in their messaging. The leader himself, Sowore, broadcasted on social media saying government will cease to exist, DSS will no longer exist. But the messaging improved later by clarifying that this is a protest for good governance. I think if they had insisted on protest for good governance, which is guaranteed by our constitution, I'm not sure there would have been a lot of problem. I also think government in itself needs to be more tolerant of opposing views. The protest at the National Stadium shouldn't have been stopped by the police. People were just gathering. The Constitution empowers the police to protect both protesters and people who are against the protest. So I think there was a bit of heavy-handedness by the Nigerian authorities. I think the problem is in the messaging, really. When you talk about revolution, it takes your mind back to Liberia. There was a certain Charles Taylor who came back from the United States and started by using the word revolution, but ended up being an armed militia that turned Liberia into a country that is not the example of the kind of revolt or change you want in Africa. Syria is also a typical example. Most of the leadership of the Syrian revolutions are here in the diaspora in the UK, but Syria has lost over 1 million people. The country is destroyed. More than 3 million.
You raise very interesting points there, but let's even talk about the government's response to this. President Buhari actually says the winner in all of this is democracy. Is that an indication, especially when you look at the way Nigerians responded to this call for revolution, that democracy has come to stay in Nigeria, and that the era of coups and revolutions are done with?
I think the government should not celebrate too soon. The government should know that a lot of Nigerians are not happy with some performance of the government, particularly when it comes to the economy and security. Quite a number of Nigerians also appreciate some of the progress made by government. I think if government had opened up more in terms of listening to the yearnings and the worries of the Nigerian people, activists would not take extreme positions such as using the word revolution. I think government should open up more. Yes, the government is right by saying it is victory for democracy, because nobody, no matter how well-intentioned it is, should be calling for a forceful removal of government in Nigeria, particularly when you have not stated adequate plan as to the alternative. If the revolution being proposed by this leadership of this movement had happened, what plans do they have in terms of the military, in terms of putting officials in place to govern the 21 states they said they were going to take over? So I think we need to be careful yet.
Would you say then that the arrest, especially when you say that the tone seemed to have softened somewhat from the idea of overthrowing a government to calls for minimum wage and all of that, would you say that it was ill-advised to arrest Sowore, or should he be let go at this time?
I think Sowore should be released. I don't think he has. I think it is worrying with some of the his statements. You could almost equate it to some of the statements made by Nnamdi Kanu. Nigeria will no longer exist. He specifically said Nigeria will no longer exist. And I think I know Sowore personally. He loves Nigeria. He means well for Nigeria. But sometimes, when you're angry, you make statements. I think the government, the security agencies should know a person that is capable of actually particularly carrying out the actions he's proposing. from somebody who has physically organized armed struggle and what have you. Sowore is not the kind of person that is going to be involved in armed struggle. So I think at this point, the government has made up their point.
All right. Kayode Ogundamisi, thank you so much for joining us on the news at this time. And still to come,